All right, Light Warriors. Today we have a very special guest, Lise Leblanc, and she's a therapist, an author, and a life coach that specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery and wellness. Lise, it's great to have you on the channel today.
Thanks for the invitation. And again, congratulations on hitting 100,000 subscribers.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll have a little silver plaque here as well pretty shortly. One of the things that I discuss on my channel, we want to improve everyday life. And in the modern world right now, it seems that narcissism is very high. And we really want to follow certain, as I call, laws of the universe. And a typical narcissist has really evolved. And something because of modern society, a covert narcissist is a big problem in the world, especially the female covert narcissist, and it's kind of tricky. So you might see a person and you could say, oh well, that's a narcissist, and it's clear as day. You could see them coming from a mile away. But a covert narcissist is actually more dangerous. So kind of to start us off, who or what is a covert narcissist?
So covert narcissists, the symptoms are the same as the grandiose. It's the expression of those symptoms that's different. So in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it's the same criteria. So you have to meet the criteria, first of all, for a personality disorder, which is the disruption in the cognition, in the emotions. It's that inflexible, maladaptive way of seeing the world, relating to the world, seeing yourself and relating to yourself. And then there's the 5 out of 9 symptoms, which is the grandiosity, the lack of empathy, the entitlement, the exploiting of other people, being envious, arrogant. All those types of things are the same symptoms. So you have to meet 5 out of 9 of those symptoms to a point that is consistent across time and across context. So there can be, I think of narcissism on a scale the way I would think of IQ as a bell curve, where most people have some level of, narcissistic traits that kind of fall in that normal range. Under stress, it might, come out a little bit higher. Once we're in survival mode, we all become a little bit more, we can become a little bit more narcissistic and self-centered and self-oriented. But then there's people that fall at the very end of the continuum, in that top 2 to 5%, where the symptoms are severe and they are across all of their areas of their lives, causing dysfunction, causing significant impairment in relationships and within their own emotional states. So what happens with someone like who is a grandiose narcissist, like you said right in the beginning, is you can spot them a mile away because they're loud, they're boastful, they're self-centered, they lack empathy and don't necessarily hide that fact. But when it comes to a covert narcissist, the grandiosity comes out differently. So they might appear very helpful, very altruistic. They might come out as very spiritual in that kind of grandiose way. And they're always seeking admiration. So a narcissist might go into, for example, some type of spiritual practice because they're suffering as well. The female covert narcissist has a lot of anxiety, they have a lot of depression, and they're living in these lower level of consciousness. So it's the shame, the fear, the anger, and it's all, feeding itself like this feedback mechanism. So they're in this distress, and they may start to they may reach out for help, they may learn to meditate, or they may learn yoga, or they may go into some spiritual practice, and then all of a sudden people regard that more highly. There's a community around that, so they get admiration around that. They start honing that area of spirituality, appearing very spiritual, being admired for their spirituality, and yet when you really get into a relationship with that person, there's the chaos, there's the drama, there's the victim stance, there's all these different symptoms of narcissism, exploitation. And so you might see them in this light that they're presenting to you. And yet when you get to know that person, you realize that it's mimicked empathy, or it's selective empathy, or it's cognitive empathy. It's not true empathy. Or you may think that they're wanting to have, or have the capacity to have, this aligned relationship in terms of values, and that what they presented initially, and yet they're really not in integrity between the image that they want to present to you and what's actually the shameful self that's under the surface, which they basically create a wall. And often because they were traumatized, shamed, and abused by a narcissist. I mean, the way to how people develop narcissistic personality disorder is the whole, nature nurture. It's, you're born with it. And if you were born with it inherited, well, probably one of your parents has it, or your sibling has it. So you're in a household that you're also experiencing narcissistic abuse. And when I think of the empathy or the compassion part of narcissistic personality disorder, and I get a lot of flack for this because people will say, "Oh, stop defending the narcissist," and I think, well, when you think about it, if they're born with this disorder, or they face narcissistic abuse and they're shamed at the very earliest parts of their lives, to a point where they have to shut down their true self and believe this programming, this shame programming, the lies being told to them by the person who their survival depends on, what happens to that person? They have to find coping mechanisms. They have to find ways to survive that. So yes, it's important for us to understand that, this is a disorder, and that person has certain symptoms that are, they're in black and white in a manual. And when we encounter these things in someone, we want to fix them. We want to rescue. We see that vulnerability. We see that trauma, and we feel like we want to save that person, or to at least help them. And that can be very powerful, especially if you combine it with the love bombing that happens in the beginning, preying on your needs and desires, then using your fears and vulnerabilities to manipulate the relationship. It's very tricky.
Yeah, especially for maybe kind-hearted men, and the use of victimhood in the beginning. One of the things that you just mentioned, I wrote a few things down, but let's bring it up now. One of the things that I discuss, unconditional love is not unconditional acceptance of poor behavior. And we could be empathetic to certain things, and maybe you've discussed before what we can or cannot tolerate. So would you like to elaborate on that? Because we could be empathetic, we identify it, and we could feel bad for the person, but we also don't want to be a doormat, because we have to make sure our cup is filled up first, because then if it's all day long, our battery is totally drained. So would you like to elaborate on that aspect?
Right. Well, I mean, it really is about having your own boundaries and your own non-negotiables. And I think every human being should really take some time and think about, what are my needs? What are my values? What are my boundaries? What is non-negotiable for me in a relationship? And you can love someone unconditionally. You can accept them for who they are from a distance. You don't have to even be in a relationship with them. And I think if you're in a stage of blame, or in a stage of, and that's part of the process of healing from narcissistic abuse. But if you stay in that anger, that fear, that shame, those lower level states, then you're in those lower level states. I mean, you're not in that unconditional love. You're not in that acceptance. You're not in that empathy. And you may choose to not have a relationship with that person because these are your boundaries. And the narcissist doesn't care about your boundaries. They have their own needs, they have their own desires, they have their own agenda. And if you set a boundary and that's not, what they want, they will resist that boundary. They will always be pushing that boundary, going against. So they're pushing you, pushing you, pushing you. Now your boundary's way over here when it was here, and you're in the corner, and they've got all the space and everything's their way. They're micromanaging your life. And it's that control, because you're their source of supply. You're like the oxygen to them, and they need that admiration. They need that supply. You know, you wouldn't go on a deep dive without checking your oxygen tank and making sure it's full and you have enough. And so it's very much being able to control their sources of supply. And when they don't, they feel very insecure, because they're always walking that tightrope. I only feel good if you uphold my self-image and you give me enough validation, reassurance, support to help me believe that this is, you know, this is the real me. And there's this other side that they keep falling over to. So they're always hunting for supply and to get those highs. And as soon as you're not giving it, then they see that as you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not quashing my shame.
Yeah. In the modern world, something that we were discussing before we got on, you could become trapped by certain things, and you don't see things like we said earlier at first when it comes to covert. So if it's a grandiose someone, and you say, well, you know what, I see it, and you know, maybe I want to play with this fire, and if you get burnt, that's on you. But where the covert becomes very dangerous, you know, we could see some tactics where people could get trapped, especially when it comes to marriage, or maybe then having a kid, and more things come into play. So are there any other signs, I know you discussed some, or specific behaviors of a covert narcissist that people should be aware of?
Right. Well, I mean, with any narcissism, there's the love bombing in the beginning. So, you know, excessive praise and compliments and idealization. So it's like they create this image of you. You go on a date, then they keep talking to you in their head. They keep imagining who you are, but it's not, you know, it's not based in reality. It's based in this image that they create, and this fantasy and this idealization of you as being this solution. So they already are putting you on a pedestal with only one place to go from there, and that is down off the pedestal. Because when they don't, you know, when you disappoint them, which you will, because you are, you know, a flawed human being just like everyone else, perfectly imperfect just like everyone else, and that's a huge disappointment. And so then the devaluation stage starts. So that disappointment, the next sign is that they cannot express that disappointment in healthy ways. So there's this unrealistic, it doesn't match. And now they start to blame you, and they start to get very passive aggressive and guilt tripping. And so they have certain strategies that if you know, you're already so addicted to their love bombing, you've been positively and reinforced, you've been idealized, you've been cast into this hero role that feels really good, you feel on top of the world, and then suddenly they start distancing, or there's these subtle fatigues, or there's this subtle control, you know, do this, do that, don't say this, go here, turn right. You know, it's just all this micromanagement, these small ways of insulting you, but in a passive aggressive. There starts to be this energy of disappointment and this energy of disdain. So it's that black and white. So when you're not on the hero side making them feel good, now you're on the villain side, and you're painted black. So when they're on that side, you're getting all that criticism, that contempt, the disdain, the disgust, and that intensifies over time. So they're pulling away, and you're saying, no, 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 no. I want those rewards back. Then you start, you know, looking for those reinforcements, trying to say, okay, you know, what do I need to do in order to get us back to that place? Now you have this competitive side. Maybe you know, you just are that type of person that thinks, I've got solutions. I can do I can do this. And so you work harder and harder to get back to that place where everything, was great, that love bombing. Plus there's the, we'll say future faking. So there's the idealized future, what's going to happen later. So you're never in the now, or rarely in the now. You're always in the past or the future, where you felt good during that love bombing, or where you're expecting to feel good again in the future, and yet things are not good in the now. So then those behaviors, silent treatment, stonewalling, there's the lack of communication, there's just more passive aggressive, guilt tripping, and then pulling on that sense of obligation intermittently. So you work really hard, and then, oh, here's some rewards. So like there's these breadcrumbs or these rewards to keep you working and feeling like there's some hope, there's possibility. And that intermittent reinforcement is the strongest type of reinforcement. Like at the slot machine, if you just kept losing, you would not come back. There has to be, wins here and there. And so you get these wins here and there, and you get this illusion of, I'm making progress, things are looking up, this is possible. And so it just keeps deteriorating, because as the supply, you don't really fill that anymore. You don't give the same high. There's like a tolerance that's built up, and so they start seeking other sources of supply. And whether you're emotionally discarded or physically, completely discarded, will depend on what resources you're still providing and how easy it is to get those resources elsewhere.
Mm. As per what you said, I've seen over the course of my entire journey in general, when you speak the truth and it clashes, they might be for you, but when you point out the truth, maybe within them, that's when they kind of get a little stirred up. And that actually is an unconditional love, as we should grow together. One thing that you have said, when they tell you and show you they're toxic in the beginning, believe them. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, in the sense that, we have our own illusions at times, and we want to believe something that is not reality. And being able to face the truth and to see someone for who they are, rather than who we want them to be, or this idealized, or this image that they're presenting to us. And we jump in maybe, and we get attached really quickly to all these rewards. But do you really know the person? Are you really building a healthy foundation for a relationship, or are you just kind of getting attached to an idea? So I think that, we all need to, take a little bit of a step back, and really not just listen to somebody's words, but to actually pay attention to that behavior. And then again, going back to knowing your own boundaries and non-negotiables, what you value, what your needs are, and what's your personality and attachment style, and really having that self-awareness, so that you can disengage and say, I'm seeing some red flags really early on in the relationship. Is this something that I want to invest in? I mean, I think if you had a financial planner and you start seeing red flags, you'd cut it off pretty fast. You wouldn't invest another $100,000. And so I think that's really being able to be honest with ourselves, because I hear so many stories about, when I look back, there was this thing and that thing and those red flags, and I told myself, I can handle this. Or I was gaslighting myself. I was minimizing, I was making excuses, I was rationalizing, justifying. And that's what we do. We chalk it up to this vulnerability that they're presenting to us. Oh, they're behaving this way because of, fill in the blank, trauma, because they're stressed, because they have this chronic illness, because of this, because of that. Okay, that may be true. That does add a layer of complexity to any relationship. But if they're always the victim, it's always about their needs and desires, it's always this self-centered self-directed relationship. So it's all about me all of the time, unless I'm trying to get something, then then that person might switch things up.
Yeah. On a community level, this is something that I've picked up on my journey of just observing. I believe that awareness is the precursor to change, so we should be aware of things. When it comes to spiritual communities, I think a lot of people, and they come running in, oh, this is a spiritual community. These people are great. So you kind of run in there. But what I kind of take is spiritual communities are actually riddled and full of covert narcissists. From what you have observed as a professional, do you see this tendency as well? And how can we make people aware of this so they're not taken advantage of? Because I feel like people go into a spiritual community and they think it's all going to be unicorns and rainbows, but maybe that's not the case.
Well, just to say, I think we talked about it a little bit already, but people will often have a lot of suffering. So there is a high comorbidity of anxiety and depression, especially in female covert narcissism. And so that person may, reach out for help. They may go see a counselor. They may not really to look at themselves, but to, fix all these external problems that keep following them, which they do believe that they have nothing to do with. They may also go into, a self-development or a spirituality route in order to ease that suffering. And when they go into these, communities, they need to fit, the image. So it's like they create this new self-image, and now their ego revolves around spirituality. The spirituality is what inflates their ego, and that image of, being this person who's highly, emotionally developed or spiritually developed, and then using this as a way to present themselves as elevated. And that immediately people might look at that person and, wow, I mean, they're a yoga instructor, so they must really be walking their talk. But if you spend some time with that person, you realize they're not walking their talk. They're not truthful with themselves. They're not really willing to accept any type of criticism. They're hypersensitive. They have all these traits that, even though they say they're like this, there's no integrity in that, because they're not actually walking that path.
Yeah.
They're just looking like they are.
An illusion.
Yeah.
One big issue, which I've seen in my Patreon community and over the course of my life, so I'm just sharing, it's not really something that I've personally experienced, when maybe a person, they purposely have a kid for this modern world, the way that the rules are of this world, to actually have dominance over someone else, and then have the kid turn on the parent. Is there a term for this? And can you kind of help people with this situation? Because this seems like this is a common situation where a child, and I feel like, especially a child, that's not free will. A child should not be used as a pawn for a game. I feel that that's very terrible, and we want to speak up, especially because a child, they don't know what's going on. So what is this called, and how could we help?
So parental alienation is the term that's typically used for this. And so it's so hard to deal with that. I have a couple of videos that I made on this subject, but there's really, no limits when it comes to what a narcissist will do to punish and to remain in their, victim stance, to paint themselves white and to paint the partner black. And they'll do that and use the child. The child is an emotional crutch for them. The child is often seen as an extension of themselves, especially the golden child. And so they're, and a lot of it is subtle. It's very subtle things that's hard to prove. It could be something like, I don't know, let's say the child is going to the other parent's house and the narcissistic mother will say, um, okay, if you're scared, you just text me if anything that scares you and anything. Well, now you're planting a seed that there's something scary over there. There's something bad. But if somebody were to listen to that out of context, they would assume there is something to be scared of, that parent is a bad parent. And it's all these, subtle and not so subtle. It's, there's some not so subtle things as well. So every time the child goes back to that the other parent, they're already brainwashed. They're already seeing through a lens that the narcissist is, implanting in them. And the other parent, despite maybe doing everything correctly, is still fighting against this lens that they're being perceived through because they're being brainwashed. So, some of the things that I recommend, it doesn't change the fact that the narcissist is going to be doing this, and different children are more, like, depending on the child, they can be more or less susceptible to these tactics. But, imagine an adult and how susceptible an adult can be to these tactics. Now, imagine a child in this guilt tripping and this passive aggressive and this, so their love of, like, the parent puts them in a loyalty bind. So the narcissistic parent's love and approval depends on the child picking their side, depends on the child buying into the lies against the other parent and supporting that. And there's, threats to the approval, to the love, to the emotional sustenance that the child also needs. So it's very, the child really doesn't have a lot of defenses, and in some ways don't have many choices.
Yeah, there's something that really, having my own community and hearing people's stories really tugs at the heart to hear people,
Mm-hmm.
I can't have a relationship with my kid, or this or that, or this is being held over. So it's very tricky waters
It's
right now.
heartbreaking.
Yeah,
It's heartbreaking.
and a lot of it too is the modern society and how things are put up. But these are things like people don't kind of understand why maybe more and more people are becoming single, because these are actual dangers, and people, especially, I talk about when people expand consciousness, or you become aware of things, and once you have achieved peace, a lot of people are saying, well, why would I risk
Mm-hmm.
going through that? And you hear some of the stories, and it's like saying that's really not what love is about. And hopefully, as we continue to raise awareness, things will get better. Relationships will get better. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the female covert narcissist, they paint this picture that they're a victim. They are so sweet. They're so innocent. And when a man gets trapped, men will feel like nobody will believe them. What is your words of advice or any encouragement about this?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true. It's the truth, and it's the sad truth. And I almost hate to say that, but I don't want to paint a picture that will, say otherwise, because of that is the experience. I talk to a lot of men. I coach men all around the world, and I hear the same types of stories that you're referring to. And they often are not believed. They're not believed by the court. They're not believed by the police. They're not believed by the children's aid, if that's because some of these cases are extreme. There's extreme situations out there, and a lot. It's not necessarily the police, but it's just family, it's friends, it's people in your own social network that don't really believe it. And what happens is that the narcissist is running a smear campaign. The narcissist is finding ways to discredit you, is looking at ways to manipulate people into seeing you again in that light. And for them, it's very much twisted in their own mind. So it's not like they're going out and I mean, they could be if they have antisocial tendencies, and there's, there's a huge, we'll say really severe case. But a lot of times they are actually seeing only their perspective and seeing themselves as a victim, as though all the things they've done don't even exist. So it's twisted in their own cognition, and so their story becomes, I'll say, more believable in a sense because it's so true to them, if that makes any sense. So even though it's not true, or it's only a fraction of the story, people might buy into that. And then the narcissist will also surround themselves with people who are going to support their narratives. They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to have any resistance. That's very frustrating to them. They're very hypersensitive to that. So they will surround themselves with those people, and anyone that doesn't support their narrative usually gets added into the, basket of bad people that they're smearing.
I feel that energy theme is part of the world right now, where a lot of people don't have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Even as we discussed when we came on, and because of a narrative of the way things are, we do know the narcissist likes to cancel you, and so that because they've painted an illusion, and the
Mm-hmm.
more that the brightness is shines, they don't want to be revealed for who they actually are. So that's why
Exactly.
I feel that, especially, I think this behavior of hurry up and do things, and kind of get into those, in the modern world, try to get that ring, or get that kid, because we have to
Mm-hmm.
hurry up because that illusion is fading very quickly.
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
feel that
create
there's a
the
clock?
trauma bond. It's oh yeah, for sure. It's create the trauma bond quickly. And that's why I was saying, take a step back, get to know someone. Don't get too attached and invested before you even really know a person, because that's the name of that game. It's create the trauma bond. Trauma bond, you could substitute for addiction. It's giving you the rush, the high, the sense of being on top of the world, the sense of having passion and purpose, and having met your soulmate, and being the one and only. And everyone has some need for significance, for being that, special and connected, and love. And so it's really that quick, intense uh, shot of, like building that sense of trust, that sense of attachment, and then starting to pull away. So intermittently distancing, the push pull, to see how much of your attachment system is locked in. Now, once you're locked in, is very, to addiction, or that attachment. And if there's any insecure attachment in the beginning, or there's any kind of blurry sense of self, then it can be very hard to break free once you're at that point of being trauma bonded. Now add uh, financial. You buy things together. You buy a house. You have a child. You get married. You create this whole life uh, around this person, around this relationship, and now it gets very tricky to disengage and to dismantle what was created from that, from that initial space. And then there's always the fake future that's un, alluring.
Yeah. All the things you just said, and a lot of men, they could be terrified of this. I read a lot of stats and what goes on, and this is not really spoken, but men's suicide rates because of being alone, like loneliness, is up.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should write mental health awareness in the comments. Mental health is really through the roof right now, and that's why I feel like everyone's got to kind of, like you said, slow down, and like it should not be a battle. It should not be you know, trying to gain an advantage over one another. Maybe also with the narcissist, instead of like we're supposed to pick each other up, maybe there's a secret competition almost. They almost take that kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's a any relationship starts with a honeymoon phase where, things are, the rose-colored glasses are on, but it's not like that addiction where all of your time and energy is just consumed by that person. You're constantly being idealized and complimented and praised and told how you're this, special one, and really getting that like trauma bond and that addiction where it starts to be pulled away. So that's like a really key piece on that front, is really recognizing when you're getting addicted and when you're starting to believe that this is some idealized one in a billion relationship or person. I think people need to pay attention to that. I think too, in terms of having had that experience, it can be easy to go down that constant rabbit hole of looking for red flags and watching these videos about, and then you start putting your own filter on, so that now you're starting to see, these things because you're paying attention to it. It's like if you go and buy a new Jeep and all of a sudden, oh, where all these Jeeps come from? Well, it's your own perceptual filters that have changed. And so you can become in that fear state. Well, that's also a lower level of consciousness. So it's really being able to build the trust in yourself. So yes, you do need to find out what the red flags are. Yes, you need to pay attention to that stuff, but you also, more importantly, need to build that self-respect, that self-trust, that self-discipline to be able to know when those flags are there, communicate, because everyone's going to have some at least yellow flags, or there's going to be, because the next stage of a relationship is the power struggle stage. So we start to, we just naturally as humans start to kind of, struggle a little bit to create that dynamic. I mean, a person with narcissistic personality disorder really overpowers the other person, where most people negotiate, they compromise, they have, mature discussions about what they like and what they don't like and what's working and not working for them. That point is really, where a person has to say, does this align with who I am? Can we work through the issues? Can we get to the next stage of attachment? And that where true trust and love and commitment and all those things happen.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
gets more trusting as it goes, there's more respect, there's more. With the narcissist, it's the opposite. So it gets less and less respect, less and less trust, less and less of all the good stuff, and more of the criticism, the contempt, the disgust, the disappointment, the disdain, the punishment, the withdrawal.
yeah. And that's the point of life. I say collectively we're greater than the sum of our parts. And like I've shared this, I've seen it. It's like, it's very strange, the world. I say, don't you want to have fun? Like whatever happened to the fun? Like everything is a battle, everything is trying to, it's very strange.
Mm-hmm.
This is the modern world. Now, we don't paint with a broad stroke. Both men and women can be
Mm-hmm.
narcissists. Both men and women could be empaths, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Recently, I came across the stat: more than 80% of women file for divorce. I saw that. But as a
Okay.
professional, as we raise awareness, whatever it is that you have experienced, would you say in the modern world, would more men or women, or is it just 50-50 in today's society? Where do you see more of narcissism coming from, if that makes sense?
So I think that it's equal. And I
Uh-huh.
think that the diagnostic manual is starting to recognize, since some studies are starting to recognize that, but I think men are diagnosed more often. So I think women are underdiagnosed with narcissism because of the presentation. They're more likely to be diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and other personality disorders. maybe borderline personality disorder, it might be OCD. So there's like these co-occurring, and it could be both, but oftentimes the narcissistic personality disorder isn't diagnosed, so they don't necessarily get the same level of diagnosis. So if you're just to go into a mental health clinic or something like that, or somewhere where people would be getting diagnosed, then you might find that there are more diagnosed males as having narcissistic personality disorder. I worked many years in a substance abuse and mental health clinic, and there were a lot of the narcissistic men who are in the substance abuse programs, and that's one of their biggest co-occurrences, co-occurring disorders. Mm-hmm.
I've seen that as well. So because this is what I kind of felt, and you're kind of wording it right. Is it like more of the male or the alpha male, right? It's grandiose, so it's easily seen, and maybe with the female, it's more covert, so it's it's more like behind the scenes. So that's why it makes it more tricky. Does that make sense? Does that fall?
Yeah, and I think it's there's some gender conditioning that girls get that and boys get that's different, that can be different. And so I think girls are more trained to be nice and to act in certain ways, which then can mask the narcissism. They get more reinforcement for being certain ways that are in the feminine energy, we'll say, and not to get into all of that, but there's just that conditioning that can cause them to mask it. And whereas men have a different type of conditioning, to be tough, to be a certain way, and maybe times are changing, but there's still some of that archetypal conditioning and even biology that may contribute to these differences, which nobody fully understands exactly why narcissism develops in this way in women. Nobody can sit and say, well, it's this and it's that and it's that. There's theories on it, but nobody knows exactly.
One of the energies that I always go to is the law of 80-20. So maybe this matches up. So a lot of what we witness in the world, it's never exact, but it always follows that 80-20. So you could see 80% of men will, 80% of women will be, and then there's the 20. It's called Pareto's principle, if you've ever heard of that. It's the law of 80-20. So that kind of like is shown maybe in that sense as well. But like, and we were talking earlier, I think I said recently, not painting things with a broad stroke. I feel like in the world, there's a big push for quote unquote toxic masculinity, and then the male is not heard, and this covert aspect kind of is not seen or addressed, and it's kind of undercover. So that's why it's important to raise awareness so people can make changes. Awareness is the precursor. Mm-hmm. So as we're aware of things, regardless of what it is, oh, I wasn't aware. Now I can move forward and we can make adjustments to our lives as we learn these things. Okay, I'm going to allow this in my life. I'm not going to allow this because I didn't see it before. Mm-hmm. So as we are kind of wrapping this up, what are maybe some final things that you would like to give advice to any person that's listening, just so that we could be aware, improve our lives, make better decisions, anything that you would like to leave us with?
Well, I think one of the things that you just said, that toxic masculinity, and I think that anything that a narcissist will grab onto, anything that they see as, something that they can poke in your integrity, in your shame, so in your fears, in your vulnerabilities. And I think it's important not to, we want to be authentic, we want to be transparent, but we also want to deal with our own stuff, deal with our own insecurities, our own shame, because when people come poking on in those spots and you go like this, it's easy to say, well, it's because that person's a narcissist. Well, wait a minute, if there was no button to push, then nothing would happen. There wouldn't be that reaction. You could stay in that, acceptance state. Whether or not you're in that relationship doesn't matter, but you could have those higher energy states of unconditional love and some of the things that you mentioned, even though you may end that relationship. So one of the things is shaming. You know, if you're in a relationship and someone starts to criticize and someone starts to belittle and someone starts to devalue, and that hits your shame buttons right away, and you start to think, well, what's wrong with me? I need to fix myself. I need to fix the relationship. I need to make this person happy in order for me to be worthy, in order for me not to feel shame or emotional distress. Because, you know, when we react either abusively or aggressively or, you know, passive aggressively, when we have these kind of lower state survival reactions to that person, we can say, well, you know, that's their fault. Okay, to some degree, they're triggering that stuff, but there's work, you know, that can be your own GPS to say, what do I need to resolve? So one, I'm not attracted to narcissists. Two, so that I can enforce my boundaries when certain things start to happen, because that's one thing. When you start setting boundaries with a narcissist, they will start shaming you, they will start guilting you, they will start pulling on your empathy strings. It will be all these tactics for you to remove those boundaries and go along with their plan. So that's not, you know, that's not a 50-50. And I think, you know, everyone needs to know, what is my state when I'm not in relationship? You know, so many people go from relationship to relationship just using that kind of as a drug. And if you don't even know who you are, what you value, what you need as a person, you don't even know your own energy state, and then you're always adding other people to the mix, then how do you even know when you're on or off balance? So I think the advice that I give to people is focus less on trying to figure out, you know, who's the narcissist and how to, you know, how to change the narcissist, or you know, how to deal with them. And I know there are some times where those ties involve children and whatnot, and you have no choice. I get that. That's a really difficult. I don't even like making those videos because it's just so hard, and there's no simple solutions to these types of problems. But in general, it's being able to know yourself, know your boundaries, respect yourself, and be able to deal with any trauma or shame that you either came into the relationship with, or maybe you left the relationship with, because if you don't, you're going to end up going and putting it on somebody else.
It's amazing. I always talk about how we all have similar frequencies, even though we're representing ourselves differently. But several things I've recently shared: know thyself, creating boundaries with the universe.
Yeah.
So once you've created that boundary, because a lot of people say to themselves, you probably see this, oh, I keep attracting this into my life, this type of person. So once you said, I will never have this in my, all of a sudden those people don't show up any longer.
Well, for sure. And I think that brings up a really good point. If you're repeatedly attracting these relationships, you're the common denominator. Like, that's information that you can take and you can say, and it's not about fault. It's just about responsibility. It's about, I want to create something different. I want to create something new and meaningful in my life. And, you know, the boundaries thing, I like what you said, because when you said, you know, set boundaries with the universe and set boundaries with yourself, these aren't things, you know, when I always think of it as a red flag in a way, when somebody comes in and they've got their 25 boundaries, you know, these are my boundaries, and like, what? I mean, that tells me that you don't trust the world, you don't trust in the universe, you don't trust in yourself. Because when you have your own boundaries and you honor your own boundaries, and that's between you and, you know, God, the universe, or, you know, it's not even something that you necessarily have to tell people about. You know, it might come up in conversation, but you're not coming in this self-protection defensive mode. And that's, you know, if that's the state that you're in because you've experienced narcissistic abuse, you know, in order to get back into an empathy state, you can say, well, imagine I had experienced that when I was 5 years old at the hands of the person who I had to rely on for my life. You know, so, you know, in defense of people with this disorder, there's also reasons, whether they were born with it or they experienced that type of, either narcissistic abuse or the type of indulgence and being used as an emotional crutch by a parent who's out for revenge against their other parent. Like, these are really, challenging situations, and the children don't come out of this unscathed. So, looking at narcissistic personality disorder and being able to recognize, like, this is a disorder. I can't fix someone with that disorder. So it's not, unconditional love and allowing a person to treat you poorly is not it's not helpful. It's enabling behavior. And knowing when you're in that type of dynamic, and your role in it and your responsibility in it, I think that's the powerful place to be. Anger might seem like the powerful place to be, but it's a low level emotion.
Yeah.
It's a low level state of consciousness.
Yeah. This was really wonderful. You're very powerful. I appreciate your work for humanity. You also have a tremendous YouTube channel. Is there any other places where people can find you?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I don't pay attention too much
I just
to
thought, if
social
you had, I don't know if you had a
media,
website or anything
I'm
else,
like,
but
yes, I do. I have a website, and
so
I'm kind of all over the place, but
yeah, all right, yeah. So whoever's getting this and Lisa's YouTube link will be in the description. So subscribe to Lise Leblanc, and if you're getting me for the first time, I'm Michael. We have a YouTube channel here, Our Everyday Lives. We do a daily video, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and we improve your life physically, mentally, and spiritually. We want to look in our all three phases of our lives, and when we focus on all three phases, we can improve our life, improve the quality of our life, and we're just expanding our consciousness. We're becoming aware of these things, and I'm very grateful for everything that you have put out today. And
thank
we'll
you,
do this again
Michael. I
sometime.
appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate you too. All right, take care. We'll do this again. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.